Today, the world is in turmoil due to the fierce battle between China and America. This war is not fought on the battlefield with explosions, tanks, and bullets. Instead, it is fought in meeting rooms, on trade graphs, and through tariffs that rise like silent mass destruction weapons. In conventional war, we can measure victory by calculating the territory controlled, enemies defeated, or troops remaining. However, in this war, everything is much more complex. There are no victory parades, no photos of troops raising their national flags. All we see are numbers, trade graphs, consumer price indexes, trade balances, and socio-economic stability within each country. Behind the scenes, leaders, economists, and capital owners are calculating not how many enemies have fallen, but how long they can survive themselves. As is well known, China and the United States are once again engaged in a trade war, a battle for economic sovereignty, technological dominance, and who gets to determine the future of humanity. Tariffs are launched one after another, not as a business strategy, but as diplomatic shots. Although this war has happened in previous years, this trade war is much more brutal and has put the world in a state of fear of a very frightening crisis. This war is not new, it's just a continuation of an old story that has been simmering and not fully closed. In 2018, the world was shocked when President Donald Trump decided to challenge China openly through massive tariffs, with the rhetoric, "America first," echoing in every speech. Trump attacked Chinese products, from steel and aluminum to electronics. At that time, China responded not with loud words but with equivalent actions. American agricultural products, such as soybeans and corn, suddenly lost their market in the land of the bamboo curtain. Farmers in the United States began to feel uneasy. Those who had once been the backbone of Trump's campaign now felt abandoned by a decision they never fully understood. At that time, the world called this conflict a trade war, but in reality, it was a clash of economic ideologies. The United States feels that China has violated intellectual property rights, manipulated currency, and refused to open up its markets fairly. Meanwhile, China sees the United States as an old power that is panicking because it cannot control the rise of a new power. The Phase 1 agreement signed in January 2020 seemed to close the wound, but it did not fully cure the infection. The United States demanded that China buy more American products. China complied only partially. Then, the pandemic came, disrupting everything, and for a moment, this war subsided into silence. Nevertheless, the roots remained festering beneath the surface. In the era of Joe Biden, the rhetoric has softened, but the pressure remains. The ban on Huawei and Chinese tech companies continues to be extended. Chip export restrictions have been tightened further. However, there has been no major explosion until 2025, which marks a new chapter. And now, the world is holding its breath again as these two powers begin to play with tariffs like knives pointed at each other. We all know that this is not about who wins, but about who will collapse first. The year 2025 began, not with parades or celebrations. The world woke up in an atmosphere of anxiety. The stock market is walking on the edge of uncertainty. Commodity prices are unstable. And big tech companies are quietly moving their production lines to Southeast Asia. Everything feels like the calm before a big storm. The United States did not start this trade war just to gain profits or because it was angry about China's trade surplus. The main reason is far more external than that. And that reason is fear. Yes, the superpower is haunted by a fear that it has been trying to suppress. Not fear of missiles, nor fear of terrorists, but fear of silent collapse, when economic dominance, cultural influence, and technological control are slowly taken over by an enemy that doesn't use weapons, named China. The first fear. The United States feels like it's losing at home. For years, American society has been fed a dream of freedom and prosperity as a reward for hard work. But beneath the surface, the foundation of the domestic economy is starting to crumble. Factories in Detroit, Pennsylvania, and Ohio are closing one by one. local products are losing out to cheap imports from China. Then, global supply chains are choosing cheap labor in Asia over American workers. Data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that more than 3.4 million manufacturing jobs have been lost since 2001, coinciding with China's entry into the WTO. This sense of loss is not visible on Wall Street, but it's very real on the streets of industrial towns. More and more Americans feel that their country has lost at home. The second fear is dependence on technology and vital components. A 2025 report from the U.S. Department of Commerce found that more than 70% of electric vehicle battery components, which are crucial for the future of the automotive industry, still depend on China. And that's not all. Rare earth metals like neodymium and dysprosium, which are essential for wind turbines and smartphones, are dominated by China, accounting for 80% of global production. The United States is also still dependent on chips made in Taiwan, which is in the shadow of a potential military conflict with Beijing. Add to that the fact that Chinese 5G technology is starting to dominate the market in developing countries, threatening U.S. dominance over global data. The third fear is capitalism that abandons society. This is a great irony for the U.S., that the free market economic system that was once proudly touted now seems to be hurting its own people. Local workers can't compete with Asian workers who are paid a fifth of their wages. Giant corporations choose global efficiency over national welfare. And in the end, it's the ordinary people who pay the price for global economic greed. This then sparks the rise of populist movements, from deindustrialization syndrome to the emergence of rhetoric like building tariff walls to protect workers. This issue becomes a political community ahead of elections. Both Democrats and Republicans are now forced to speak out strongly against China, because staying silent means losing votes. The fourth fear is losing status as a world leader. This may be the biggest fear for the United States, that it's no longer leading the world. In the past, the dollar was a tool of global control. But now, China has developed its own financial system. In the past, Silicon Valley technology was the gold standard. But now, Huawei, Alibaba, and BYD are competing aggressively. In the past, developing countries were racing to become US allies. Meanwhile, now they're racing to secure funding and projects from Beijing. In the end, America is starting to realize that the American dream may have passed. And the only way to survive is to fight back, even if it means burning the global market in the process. Therefore, in April 2025, the United States officially increased import tariffs on key products from China to 245%. This is certainly not a typo. An official statement from the U.S. Department of Commerce claimed that this step was taken to protect domestic industries from unfair economic practices that have been ongoing for too long. However, the world understands that this is not just economic protection. This is a declaration of Trade War 2.0. This step targets vital sectors, including semiconductors, smart devices, electric vehicle batteries, and other high-tech components. It didn't take long for China to respond. Beijing quickly retaliated by raising tariffs by up to 125% on various U.S. exports, including agricultural products like soybeans and corn, as well as electronics and automotive products. In addition to raising tariffs on U.S. exports, China also condemned the tariff policy as economic intimidation and called for equal and mutually respectful dialogue. However, the world knows that China is not just talking, as behind the scenes, they are starting to divert large orders to Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa. When the US attacks with tariffs, threats, and media attention, China responds in a much more silent but still deadly way. On the surface, the Bamboo Curtain Nation appears to be calming the situation. High-ranking officials talk about dialogue, call for multilateral cooperation, and urge the world not to panic. However, behind the peaceful speeches, China is moving quickly, silently, and strategically. The US seems to have forgotten that China in 2025 is not the same as China in 2018. Now, they are technologically independent, have a broader trade network, and are stronger in global diplomatic influence. This means that after the 2018 trade war, China, which was under pressure from the US, has successfully done its homework. Large Chinese tech companies are no longer dependent on US chips. They have developed various local alternatives, forged trade cooperation with African and Asian countries, and expanded the Belt and Road to strategic regions. China is even partnering with new economic blocs with BRI+ countries to reduce dependence on the US dollar. China is no longer playing the same game, but they have created a new game that is even hard for the US to match. Even when the US raises tariffs, causing dozens of countries to negotiate with the US, China remains steadfast, making the US more frustrated, helpless, and forced to swallow its own words. The new game created by China actually starts from a simple understanding that relying on the US market means giving the opponent a weapon to destroy itself. So, years ago, they began to slowly prepare an exit strategy from this trap. The first step: China made the African market a field for investment expansion, then dominated Central Asia wrapped in infrastructure projects. Latin America was lured with cheap credit and technology. And most crucially, ASEAN became a new major trading partner. With this, in 2025, when the trade war with the US reignited, China quickly diverted its export flows to these partners. Countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, Pakistan, and Nigeria became new ports for Chinese-made goods. And that's why, with confidence and determination, one Beijing official stated, "If America closes the door, we will open 1,000 other windows for the Chinese side." This success was not enough. They then took the second step, building a strong domestic market. China realized that one of its major weaknesses in the first trade war era was dependence on exports. But now, their strategy has changed. The Chinese government aggressively promotes domestic consumption, leveraging a growing and increasingly prosperous middle class. Second and third-tier cities are built with expanded public facilities, and state spending is directed towards strengthening local MSMEs. They massively promote domestic products with booming ads, "Proud of our products," and "Rise with our own strength." As explained, China slowly prepared all exit strategies. Therefore, they took the third step, building technological independence. This is where China's trump card is stored, and 2025 is the time to reveal it. The US can ban Huawei, restrict TikTok, and block chips from Taiwan. But now China is no longer silent. They are pouring massive funds to build an independent technology ecosystem. SMIC, or Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, has grown into a new tech giant. Huawei has created its own chips with 7 nanometers technology that starts to rival global standards. Then, a local operating system to replace Android is being introduced in the Chinese domestic market. They are even forming technology alliances with Russia, Iran, and India to build an alternative internet, independent cloud systems, and digital trade platforms free from Silicon Valley's dominance. Next, China took the fourth step, infrastructure diplomacy. While the world is busy arguing over tariffs and stocks, China is extending its reach in another path, the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. However, this new generation of BRI is not just about trains and ports but digital infrastructure and data connectivity. By 2025, China's 5G network had entered more than 60 countries. Undersea fiber optic cables connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe were built by Chinese companies. Then, Baidu's communication satellites were launched to strengthen China's own navigation system. With this, we can understand that China not only wants to trade but also wants to dominate the flow of information and future logistics. But once again, these steps were not considered enough by China. They then took the fifth step, reducing dependence on the dollar. Everyone knows that the dollar is the ultimate weapon of the United States. But China is sharpening its own weapon by creating a digital yuan through the People's Bank of China. The country has started testing and implementing an official digital currency directly supervised by the state. And by 2025, more than 300 million people have used it domestically. Then, more importantly, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Russia began accepting oil export payments in digital yuan. And at the same time, BRI+ countries are in talks to create an alternative international transfer system besides SWIFT. This means that if the dollar is the lifeblood of the global financial system, China is creating a new circulation. And of course, this makes Washington very uncomfortable. From this explanation, we can understand that China's strategy is not about winning today but ensuring victory tomorrow. Their strategy is not about who wins quickly. They play in the long term, like a chess player who is willing to sacrifice pawns to win in 10 moves ahead. They know that the United States will tire of elections and domestic pressure. The global market will slowly seek stable alternatives. And the world, which is being torn apart by tariffs, will need a trade hug from someone. And China will be there as the savior. The US-China trade war did not occur in a vacuum. The world is now connected in a fragile global economic network. So one disruption in one node, especially if that node is two major economic powers, will shake the entire system. And indeed, just a few weeks after the tariffs were imposed, the shocks began to be felt around the world. Not just on the stock market scoreboard but also in factories, ports, and workers' pockets. In its latest report released on April 16, 2025, the World Trade Organization, WTO, delivered a stunning prediction that global merchandise trade growth in 2025 is projected to be only 0.2%, a sharp decline from the initial estimate of 3%. This is not just a normal correction. This is a hard alarm that the world is losing momentum. Furthermore, trade volume between the United States and China is predicted to drop by up to 80% for some sectors. Demand for raw materials from developing countries has declined drastically due to export market uncertainty. Add to that, commodity prices from metals to food have begun to fluctuate wildly. The effects of this war spread faster than a virus, creating investor panic, project delays, and mass layoffs looming. Yet, for decades, the world has believed in one thing: that free markets are the heart of progress. This theory became the main song of globalization. The world is interconnected, goods move across continents, money flows from New York to Nairobi, and from Shanghai to Surabaya. Every country was convinced that by opening up, they would grow. That by embracing the principle of free trade, they would chase the dream of growth. But now, in 2025, all these doctrines seem fragile, even dying. And one of the reasons for its death is the two countries that have been the main pillars of the system, namely the United States and China. In the past, countries competed to lower tariffs, but now, they are competing for the right to raise them. The United States, which once promoted economic liberalization at the WTO, IMF, and GATT, is now leading the charge to close markets. The 245% tariff on Chinese products announced in April 2025 is not just a retaliatory action. It is a hard statement that the principle of free trade is no longer relevant in the midst of political ambition and national fear.